Hey, what is up guys? It's Harrison Barron, the Millennial Entrepreneur. Now in this video, I want to talk to you guys about blogging and evergreen content versus non-evergreen content, and ultimately what's really important to you and to your success. So right off the bat, what is evergreen content? Evergreen content is when something is applicable back when you wrote it. So it could be 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe even 10 years ago, and is still applicable today. Non-evergreen content is just the opposite. If you wrote it 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years ago, and it's no longer applicable today, that is non-evergreen content. So why am I even talking about this? Well, I was on a Facebook group and somebody was like, hey, I have 500 blogs. I've been blogging for a long period of time, and I'm thinking about moving my blogs and all that kind of stuff, right? Something that I think a lot of people don't really do is look at, hey, is this evergreen content versus non-evergreen content? So if it's evergreen content, yeah, chances are pretty good you could probably keep it. But if it's not evergreen content, your content is gonna die. So what does that mean? That means you wrote it a long time ago and is no longer applicable to today. So whatever that might be, it doesn't really necessarily matter what kind of content you were creating, but if you wrote it back in the day and it's no longer applicable, that content is not evergreen and it's dying. So here's the real big problem with that. For example, in this case, this person had 500 blogs. Now, I don't know what the content was about, but if you have 500 blogs, congratulations. I'm really proud of you. I love making content. It's probably one of my favorite things to do. But if a lot of that content isn't relevant anymore, so it could be laws, it could be finance, it could be policies, anything that's going to be changing. Great example, digital marketing, constantly changing. So if that content is no longer relevant and that person isn't going back and updating it to make sure it's the best content possible, that content turns from death to zombie mode, in my opinion. And zombie mode is something that Google doesn't like. It's zombie content, you get zombie pages. And zombie pages are pages that have just been around and alive for a really long time that aren't providing any value. It's actually worse for your website and worse for your Google rankings to keep zombie pages up. So there's a couple different things that you can do to help make sure all your stuff stays evergreen and ultimately keep going forward. The first thing you're gonna wanna do is go back and revise some of your content. If your content is no longer applicable. For example, I wrote a couple articles on my personal website, harrisonbarron.com, that talk all about the pandemic and how to make sure that your business is gonna survive the pandemic and creating content and really making use of your time. Well, in a couple more years, that content is no longer gonna be relevant. Now, at least I hope it's no longer gonna be relevant. But the chance of us having another pandemic in the near future is probably pretty slim. So in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years, I'm gonna remove those pieces of content because they're not evergreen. However, creating content and the art of writing a blog and the art of writing an article and all of that kind of stuff is evergreen. That content is not going to change. Now, there are some things that might need tweaking, in which case you would wanna go back to that old content and give it a little refresh, a little revamp and things like that. That's great. I'm a huge fan of that. Definitely do that. But if you're not going to go back and you're not going to spruce up that content to make sure it's the most accurate information possible, make sure that you say, hey, every year or so, you go through all of your old content and figure out what's applicable to today versus what's not applicable to today. And try to give it a really unbiased opinion. Really think about is there a couple thousand people that would find value in this? If there's not a couple thousand people that are really interested in learning about what you have to say from 5 or 10 years ago, scrap it. Honestly, scrap it. It's not going to help you in any way because those pages are going to turn into zombie pages. And zombie pages, Google just looks at it, it's like, you ever hear the term like when people say, hey, I'm going to, he's got all this luggage, right? That's the exact same thing. Google doesn't want you to have that luggage, doesn't want you to have that burden of having all of these zombie pages attached to you. That freaks them out. They're like, oh my God, why do they have all this content? Why haven't they not updated it, right? But on the flip side of things, if you go back every year and update your content, now 500 articles is a lot of content, but maybe you take your 100 most recent articles, or better yet, the furthest away articles, meaning the ones that you wrote first, and go back and revise them, chances are pretty good that content is fine then. Because Google goes, hey, thanks for renewing that. Thanks for making sure the information's accurate. And you, as the person who wrote all that content, then can go and say, oh, this is no longer applicable. Or, oh my God, this happened. I can add this in there and it'll be so much more valuable to my readers. That is the best thing in the world. But if you go and you just haven't touched it in forever, Google's gonna eventually go, you know what, you're more of a liability than you are worth it. Because even though some of your content is really good, they don't want the reader to stumble upon old, stagnant, and kind of gross content, right? And I say those words because That's what it is, right? If it's no longer applicable and hasn't been applicable to years, that's going to leave a really bad taste in that reader or consumer's mouth. And ultimately Google goes, you know what? It's just not cutting it anymore. And that's a huge problem. So whatever your content is about, right, make sure you go through it. I usually tell people once a year. Just go through it once a year and comb through all your content. I create a lot of podcasting content. My podcast is in the top 5% of the world, and I love talking about podcasting. But even podcasting technology is changing, and maybe some of the platforms that I wrote about in the past are no longer applicable to today. Whereas on the flip side of things, maybe some of that content is more applicable today than it ever has been before. So I have a really popular article that is LinkedIn versus Alignable, the pros and cons, right? That may not be applicable in 3 or 5 years. Alignable might close down, LinkedIn might not do a good job, right? I have to go back and just tweak it, right? Maybe they're both still there, but the content that I wrote comparing the two is probably not going to be accurate anymore. And Google wants to provide the most accurate information possible, or at least what it thinks to be the most accurate information possible for their consumers and readers. So going back and tweaking that content and maybe just reading it over and saying, hey, is this still relevant? Yes. Great, keep it around. Maybe just change a couple of verbiages and words and things like that. But on the flip side of things, maybe it's dead. Maybe you look at that article and you're like, oh my God, this hasn't been applicable in years. Scrap it. Done. And don't think that like it's gone forever. Maybe save it in a Word doc or save it in your Google Drive. And maybe in 3, 4, 5, 10 years down the road, maybe it becomes applicable again. Maybe it's different yoga poses that are popular, were popular 5 years ago and aren't popular today, right? It doesn't mean that you have to scrap everything. I'm not saying go through and just delete all your content. What I am saying is go through and figure out what's actually relevant to today versus what was relevant 5 years ago. And if those aren't the same, then you need to either tweak that content, fix that content, or get rid of that content. If it's still the same, keep it. That's fine. Give it another spelling check or something like that. Maybe spruce it up, maybe add another couple images. Google loves that kind of stuff. Google wants to know like, hey, your pages are really, really active, right? On my personal website, harrisonbarron.com, I'm probably good for another year or so because all of my content was written in the last year and a half. So all my content is still extremely relevant to today, but it probably won't be in 3, 4, 5 years from now. So these are all things that you need to take into consideration and keep creating content. I don't want you to stop creating content, but making sure that you don't have zombie pages where you have stuff from the past that is dragging you down is really, really important. I mean, I cannot even emphasize it enough. It is so critically important because if it's just sitting there doing nothing, chances are pretty good Google's going to kind of swipe it out of the sky. Kind of like your little fly and is just going to say no because it doesn't want those consumers going to see that content. There are some exceptions to this rule. Now, if you're writing about history and things like that, yes, your old content is probably going to be fine, right? Or if you're writing about relevant news and things like that, you could also create different parts of your website that says history and all this, maybe what happened on this day or all that kind of stuff. So there are definitely exceptions to the rule. Things in finance, maybe if it's how to save money and how to live, more frugally and things like that, chances are pretty good. That's probably pretty close to evergreen, if not evergreen content, right? It's not going to go anywhere. But there are a lot of things, especially in the tech space and all that kind of stuff, that are dying. So even if you're doing affiliate income and things like that from Amazon, see if anybody's clicked on your links. See if anybody's visiting those pages anymore. And if nobody's visiting those pages, you can go into Google Search Console and see what pages are declining and go in and say, you know what? Is this relevant? If the answer is no, fix it or scrap it. That's it, right? Especially if that product is no longer being sold. Get rid of it. It's only going to hurt your website. Whereas if it's still good, keep it going and keep it going and keep it going. And if you find a little niche where there's a lot of popular stuff and you know that this is going to last a long time, keep writing about it. Like, don't not write about it because there could be the potential of it dying after 3 or 5 years, but write about it. Make that money or get that traffic for the next couple of years. And then when it dies, just change it out. Maybe scrap it. Maybe there's a predecessor of a new model and things like that. Or maybe keep that as a history log where you can go back and refer to it. So, hey, what was the most popular vacuum in 2011, right? It's probably not a bad article. Is it evergreen? No, but you could go back and say, hey, in a 2020 article, oh my God, look at how technology's changed. I wrote this article back in 2011, right? And this is how this kind of stuff is happening versus now. And the other really interesting thing too is if you want to take this approach, whatever platform your website is on, you could just tell Google, hey, don't index this page. So where you can still provide value for your readers, and you could just tell Google, hey, this information isn't relevant for you to show out to other people, but I do refer back to this in some of my other content. And if that's the case, then do that. Just go in there and click do not index. And it's that simple. Or just go into your Google Search Console and say, do not index this page. And it is that easy to stop it from indexing that page. And it's literally gonna boost your stuff. If you have a really old website with a lot of content on it, go just fix it. Go in there and tell Google, like, hey, you could probably stop reading these 20 articles because they're no longer helpful. Google's gonna say, oh, thanks so much. We really appreciate that. And your search rankings are going to climb and climb and climb. So I hope this video helps. I've seen so many people with this like zombie content and things like that. And it's great, but every once in a while you got to go in and you got to kind of purge the system. It's really, really important. If you guys need help with this or anything like that, please leave a comment down below. I'd love to help you guys out, or check out my agency, growth-generators.com. Also, stay tuned. I'm going to be putting together a little mini course, or better yet, a little membership if you guys are interested. It's going to be dirt cheap for anybody watching YouTube and things like that. And basically you can come in there and I'm going to help you answer your questions. So come hang out with me, all that kind of stuff. I'd really love to help you guys. And my goal is to help other entrepreneurs or aspiring entrepreneurs grow their businesses. So that's why it is so cheap. I really genuinely want you guys to succeed. I hope that helps. My name is Harrison Barron, the Millennial Entrepreneur. I'll see you guys later. Bye.